One of the biggest myths out there is that people just don't like to change. In fact, people are quite positive about change. They know that to improve is to change. What they don't like is being changed.
The organizations that will define the next decade won't simply be the smartest organizations, they'll be the ones that are the most adaptable. And adaptability is something that we can learn. And you can build it into the system that actually creates the conditions where people are ready, willing, and able, and even excited to change.
Welcome to the So What from BCG, the podcast looking at the ideas shaping business, the economy, and society. I'm Georgie Frost. AI is transforming the way businesses operate, and CEOs are under enormous pressure to make sure their organizations don't get left behind. But history suggests that most large-scale transformations fail. So how can businesses stay focused and get to the finish line? Joining me today is Kristy Ellmer, North American leader of BCG's transformation practice, and Julia Dhar, North American leader of people and organizational practice. Together, they're the founders of BCG's Behavioral Science Lab and co-authors of the best-selling new book, How Change Really Works: 7 Science-Based Principles for Transforming Your Organization. Kristy, Julia, welcome. Before we talk about how change really works, let's define, if you wouldn't mind, what we actually mean when we talk about change and transformations in a business context.
We think about transformation as any deliberate effort to shift how people get something done together. So that can be an AI rollout, it can be a merger, it can be a change in the customer service. The transformation isn't about changing just the strategy. It's actually about changing how people show up on Tuesday morning. So think about it as, are people coming and acting differently 6 months from now in the way that they do the work and the way that they're operating?
Julia, why write a book about change?
There are any number of books about change. We've spilled a lot of words over the last half century about our disappointment with the rates of success in organizational change. I frankly think we're not scandalized enough about how frequently change is not successful in organizations. But there were two reasons, really.
Mhm.
Number one is it is not that change fails all the time. There are successes, and they're not random. They leave clues, and we wanted to systematically put those clues together into a useful body of knowledge for our practitioners, for CEOs, for chief transformation officers, just for someone trying to make a positive change at their company or in their community. The second is that we have an incredibly helpful body of knowledge, in fact, bodies of knowledge from the behavioral sciences, psychology, economics, neuroscience, customer research about human beings, about how we change, what are the circumstances under which we predictably and sustainably can make a shift in our behavior. 20 years ago, a really treasured friend, colleague, mentor, hero of ours, Jeannie Duck, wrote a book called The Change Monster, which gave concepts to what I think a lot of people were feeling about the difficulty of change. One of the neatest things about the last 2 decades about building behavioral science at BCG has been that so many of the concepts, the propositions in Jeannie's book now have science that did not exist at the time to back them up, and to affirm them.
Julia, can you go into more detail for me about why and where so many transformations fall down?
I think a number one, error that we make upfront is having false alignment rather than true agreement, not devoting sufficient time to say, do we have the same set of objectives and intentions and measures of success for the transformation among a relatively small group of executives? This is really simple. This is like the cheapest behavioral science hack of all time. If you're embarking on this journey, if you're midway through the journey, get that group of people together, give them each a piece of paper and a pen. They can share a pen if budgets are tight and write down what are the goals of this transformation and how will we know if we have achieved them. You'll be surprised by how often you get wildly different answers. The second, in the middle, what Kristy always talks about as the messy middle, is assuming that change in behavior, commitment, energy will just come by default, that it will emerge naturally and spontaneously rather than being something that we plan for. It won't. Of course it won't. And then the third is actually sustaining that momentum over a really long period of time. One of these consistent themes from even very tenured executives, one of my um, favorite CEOs who I admire a lot said the other day, I'm on my third like really significant transformation and turnaround at my third company. And I had forgotten how difficult it would be. I'd forgotten how hard it is to do something like this. I always just thought it would be a little bit easier. Planning for that idea that there are periods where it will be difficult and boring and painful to move through the journey is really critical.
Kristy, the messy middle?
The messy middle. The messy middle isn't dramatic, it's actually quite quiet. And this is the thing that leaders need to be paying attention for. This is when you're in the middle of the transformation and maybe some things are going on track, some things are maybe off track, but you've been at it for a while. Meetings become updates instead of decision meetings. Initiatives maybe slip by 2 weeks, maybe then it's a couple of months. And you start to hear a lot of reporting increases, but actually a lot less discussion and problem solving and challenging it. And that is when the leader should start to worry. If you think about momentum, momentum isn't something that disappears overnight. It actually leaks. And in the messy middle, that is where the momentum is leaking. And your job as a leader is actually to say, how do I create and maintain that momentum throughout the transformation? Because that is where transformations go to live and die.
Julia, you mentioned about your favourite CEO going through 3 transformations.
I don't have a favorite CEO, Georgie.
Oh,
They're
sorry,
all my
one.
favorite CEO. That
Forgive
would
me.
be like having, yes, a favorite
Yeah,
family member.
sorry. No biases here, of
I
course. Of
do
course.
just I do deeply admire this one.
You mentioned a CEO who you admire greatly. Can I say greatly as well?
Certainly you may.
Excellent stuff. Julia, you mentioned a CEO that you admire greatly. They've gone through 3 transformations. I'm just wondering how similar transformations are, depending on, I suppose, what you're transforming. And with that, AI is, of course, going to be on many CEOs' agendas. How fundamentally different would that transformation be from other kinds of transformation?
I think human beings are beautiful and unique. Thank goodness they are, because that's why I have a job. Transformations are equally beautiful and unique. And I say a little bit of that in jest because, of course, there are ways in which human beings are very similar. There are ways in which organizations are very similar. This is why benchmarks and best practices are somewhat useful. But acknowledging and taking time to learn about the ways in which an organization is beautiful and unique, the beliefs that people have about it, the beliefs that they have about the things that will be difficult or easy inside their organization are really important. And I think that's a really important gesture of respect and empathy for anyone who is trying to make change happen, is to understand where are people actually beginning, because it will reveal to you something really obvious, which is that everyone is always starting from a quite a different starting point than you. What's distinct and different about AI? Probably two things. Number one, I think, is the degree and intensity of change. I don't think it's hyperbole to say this is highly, highly likely to be the single most disruptive change that any one of the 5 generations currently in the workforce are likely to see in their working career. Number 2 is the way in which, it challenges or forces people to confront their identity. So very often in any type of organizational transformation, people are asking, will I have a job? What will I be doing? Who will I be doing it with? One of the things that is different in some AI transformations is people are asking, uh, if I don't write software code, who am I? What is valuable about being a person in this organization? At the same time as they are asking, what should I advise my child to do? Do I think my spouse or significant other will have a job? And so the complexity and intensity of the emotions that people will have around that are likely to be more significant than in other situations.
But with something like AI, and I feel we're in quite a nascent period here, what does the end point look like? Do we know? And does that make it more complicated?
No, I don't think we know. And I think what we're working through right now is actually understanding what does the change look like and how can we think about it in sort of chapters. And I think one of the elements that we talk about in the book that was really important to us is this idea of endings. And the important reason it matters so much is because humans need endings. And so one of the things we recognize and we hear from a lot of our organizations that we work with is my people are tired, right? The organization is fatigued. And now you're throwing all of this AI change in. And so, how can we actually get people to improve their ability to sort of take on change? And one of the things that we found is companies just keep adding on to levels of change. And I think about it now that we are actually in a change economy, meaning we need to constantly be changing. But that doesn't mean that you can't construct endings with natural periods to actually help people see the start and the end of something, which is actually going to improve their confidence and therefore their cognitive load to take on the next change. I think in the AI age that we're in right now, we can draw some inspiration, particularly as well as we think about how to make AI more successful from a story that we tell in the book. One of the things that happened during World War II is there was the US pilots were having a lot of accidents and they couldn't figure out why. And interestingly enough, the government went and hired someone called Paul Fitz, who is a psychologist. And what they found was it was actually the cockpit design of the airplane that was creating all the mistakes. There weren't natural human ways in sort of how they would use different parts in the cockpit. Think of all the buttons in different places. And so he actually redesigned the cockpit. And immediately what they found was an increase in sort of performance from the pilots. And so if we think about that story and we put AI into it, right now we're sort of giving people a tool and we're saying, use AI, right? Use it into your workflow. And what people are doing is sort of small changes or sort of playing with it. We actually need to think about how do we redesign sort of the cockpit with AI so that people can engage in it differently. And when you start to do that, you'll actually get people more engaged in the process versus just giving them the tool.
Julia?
If your assumption is that a car is just a faster horse, you miss a lot of the chances to think about the driver. We've spent a lot of the last 2 years hearing from senior leaders telling people to just get on the bus when it comes to AI. And I increasingly think that isn't very helpful advice. Number one, because people already know it. Our research suggests that close to 90% of employees know that they will need significant and substantial retraining, reskilling to stay competitive in their job, at their company, in the economy overall. But the thing that really bends me out of shape about it is the thing about buses is they usually have a large sign on the front that tells you where the bus is going. They have predictable and planned routes and stops along the way that tell people what to expect. So I'd love us to spend the next 6 months, the next 12 months being a little bit more introspective among leadership teams and asking, how well have we told people where the bus is going and what to expect along the journey?
How do you know when, I mean, to use your bus analogy, when the bus is going in the wrong direction and actually it's probably best just to get off and start again?
Organizations are full of feelings and facts, and feelings are like, even more important than facts, but a feeling is not the same as a fact. So, number one, if you're an executive, if you're leading a change and you start to have a feeling that the energy is coming out of it, the success, attention, focus is perhaps not what you remembered, rightly or not what you remembered at the beginning or not what you expected. First, that's just a feeling. Let's get some facts. A good set of facts would be how are we doing versus our original objective? An equally useful set of facts would be how do other people feel? What measures of the emotion and commitment do we have from other people in the organization who we are expecting to change? Do they believe that we will be successful? How are they feeling about it? And let's say, Georgie, that your original diagnosis is totally correct, that this effort appears to have fizzled out, that none of the things that we hoped that people would do and have happened, that none of the tools we built are being used. And we kind of have two choices at that point. One is you can look for somewhere to put that blame, and very often you'll end up with narratives like, well, people are not very engaged or not very motivated, or and, like, not very appreciative of all the hard work that has happened. But the alternative, shout out to Katie Milkman, a phenomenal professor at Wharton, is to induce a fresh start. to just say sometimes it is not that we need to begin again, but let's just declare a moment where we can re-begin. And one of the things that Professor Milkman has found is that we're much more likely to be successful in making a change at emotionally significant milestones like the 1st of January, your birthday, a Monday, the start of a month. The thing that I love about this research is, as it has continued to progress, is just declaring a fresh start can be psychologically incredibly powerful. And number two, using that mechanism of a fresh start is not an admission of defeat. It's sort of how you refocus everyone to be successful.
Kristy, what's your view?
I think about momentum as something that's actually a management system. So, how do I feel ownership of creating that? How do I create more recognition in the organization to create some momentum, even if we're starting to leak it? If I think about how do I take the initiatives and maybe break them down into smaller pieces so I can start to show some more wins on the board. It's similar to when you're doing any sort of activity like long distance running or something. And that idea of people feeling like they're winning is actually going to create that momentum.
If you were only going to remember one thing, I think it would be that all of us are addicted to progress. And like the dopamine hit on progress is so high. And being able to give that to someone by creating a structure in which they will have made progress, they get to see that progress, you can make it visible to other people and to themselves, is a free gift to people doing the hard work in the organization. And by the way, is going to end up being a free gift to the shareholders.
I want to dig into why it matters so much to give people ownership in successful transformations. Why is that so key?
I think one of the elements we like to actually use the word is agency. And that idea of I actually feel some agency and that I'm in control a little bit more. And as you think about an organization, depending on the size and scope of your transformation, you might have thousands of people that are actually being affected by the change. And so the idea is how do you actually create agency across that? One of the things that we saw in the science was something called the IKEA effect. And basically what it came down to is a study that was done that actually had people build IKEA furniture and had others sort of purchase IKEA furniture. The people that built the IKEA furniture actually saw a 63% increase in their perceived value of that IKEA furniture. Julia often likes to say it like this, that people don't burn down houses that they build. We actually spend a lot of time designing a system in a transformation that actually says we're creating that agency. We're getting more than just participation. We're allowing people to sort of make micro decisions or be part of influencing communities or groups that are working teams where they have more say. And the more you do that, you create that more ownership in the transformation. And all of a sudden, it's not 10 people rowing in the boat, right? It's hundreds, if not thousands, all rowing and rowing in the same direction because they believe in it.
Julia, what's your take?
All of the hyperscalers, all of the model companies are talking now about human agency, which is so encouraging to me because 2 years ago, when we decided to devote a whole chapter to it, no one was talking about it. And for us, it was a direct response to, I think, some really dangerous cliches in organizational change. Things like we need to bring people along. My own mental image of like dragging people into something, which by the way sounds terrible for both parties involved. We just need to get people excited. Well, I think the worst thing that you can do in almost any situation is tell people how you think they should feel about something. So telling people that you need them to get excited, I think is a bit like telling people not to get defensive. It's going to produce the exact opposite result that you hope. Or when you say, we need generically some change champions in the organization. Well, if they don't have any ability to act with agency, to honestly raise issues and resolve them, then they just become propagandists for the state. Right? None of that is useful. What is unbelievably useful, especially when there will never be enough time or money or attention to do all the things that we want to do in a company, maximizing the ability for people to make choices, take action, see the impact of those, have agency, gives you the chance to multiply the results of what you are going to do. A COO who I also very deeply admire, was once rolling out a big change program across a complicated site and a very like diverse and diffuse site. And I said, how's it going to work after we train people? How are we going to make sure that they do it? Because they have a lot of independence, a fair bit of autonomy in how they do their work, but in a very complicated, very safety conscious environment. And the COO said, oh, I mean, I will like stand in the control room over their shoulder and make sure that they do it. And I said, yeah, I hear you. Solid plan until the point at which you have to go to the restroom or get a coffee. And then the whole change agenda falls apart. And so getting the human at the center, the human who you have to invite and encourage to change makes all the difference.
Okay, Kristy, so no standing over people's shoulders, but what are the three things that you think every CEO or every leader should do to improve their chances of making it to the finishing line, getting through that messy middle?
So first thing is that idea of I am creating a change and it is a product and a service that I need my employees to buy into. And my job is to create a system that makes it easy for them to change and to buy in. So number one is the mindset. The second is designing a program that makes it very easy for people to have agency and participate in. So too often in transformations, we like to look at things at sort of that 30,000 foot level, sort of the investor view, if you will, right? This is the 5 pillars and how we're going to drive transformation. These are the 5 KPIs that we're going to measure. Here's the EBITDA impact, and understanding that as we think about how does that translate to the employees actually doing the work, we need to really break it down into small, manageable pieces. So really, as they're designing a transformation with their leadership team, are they designing it in a way that actually is about how the employees are going to engage in it versus how they want to engage in it? And then the third is as they think about kicking off a transformation, they're going to spend a lot of time getting ready, preparing, building that excitement. And then it sort of as it gets out into the organization, you see leaders kind of scale back a little bit. The reality is they actually need to dial in and actually make more time for change and progress and really actually build a plan around it.
Okay, we've covered the so what. Now it's the now what. What are the next immediate steps leaders should take? Julia?
Number one, make clear and specific requests. This works in your personal life as well, by the way, but precise expectations are a game changer. The second is where you have a change that is struggling, ask yourself earnestly, honestly, sincerely, empathetically, why would anyone do this? Is it likely that they will be able to make this change? And if your answer to why would anyone do this is because I told them to, that's none likely to be sufficient. And then the third is make progress visible and positive. We cannot overpraise successful progress and consistently seeing the behaviors that we would like to have more of in the organization.
Kristy?
I think leaders sometimes think successful transformation requires extraordinary people, and I don't think it does. It actually requires ordinary people working in systems that help them succeed in the change that we're trying to drive. And have you built a system and a way of working that is actually allowing people that you have today to be better and to change and do things differently? Because what we see with successful transformation is it's not rare nor mysterious. It's knowable, it's repeatable, and it's really based in that sort of science of how humans change.
Fabulous. Kristy, Julia, thank you so much. And thank you for joining us. If you'd like to get your hands on Kristy and Julia's book, How Change Really Works, 7 Science-Based Principles for Transforming Your Organization, you can find the link in the show notes.